Welcome to another episode of Mexican in the Kitchen. Today I have a really nice recipe. This is the kind of recipe I love because we're learning a technique or a way of doing things, and once you learn that, the ingredients are not that important. You can switch them, you can play around, you can make it your own. For this recipe I really like choosing my jalapenos to be a bit larger, but here in Finland I chose the largest ones I could find. If you live in Mexico or maybe even in the US, you might find way nicer jalapenos. The bigger the jalapeno is, the easier it will be to stuff, so that's the reason why. The first thing I want to do is to prepare my jalapenos. For this I am using a skillet. It's on a 7 out of 9, so medium high fire. In Mexico it's quite common to have a gas stove, so what you would usually do is just open the flame and just take them straight there. Very quick, very easily, just char the outside layer. If you have a grill, a fireplace, you can also do it like that. I have also used sometimes the air fryer. You just rub a bit of oil on the outside layer so the heat concentrates even more right there, and just put it for a few minutes. Whatever you decide to use, the whole point is to burn them as much as possible. Try to burn the whole skin, and then we can continue. The only downside with this method is that jalapenos are not even. They will start rolling, they will not always settle on the position you want them to settle, but you can always lean against another jalapeno and try to burn them as evenly as possible. Of course, if you have some spots that are not completely charred, that's not really an issue. This is how my jalapenos look now, and I'm going to show you this trick. You probably don't need them with jalapenos, but you might use it if you find it easier. Just take them, throw them into a plastic bag. I'm going to close it. In this case, it's just a Ziploc. It's very easy to just close it. And then I'm going to wrap it on a kitchen towel. This will make them sweat in the bag, and then will soften the outside layer so we can peel them easier. As I said, with jalapenos, you don't really need it. It's quite easy to peel these, but if you're using another kind of pepper, just like a poblano pepper or something else, this might become handy. While I'm waiting for my jalapenos, I will start cutting the cheese. In this case, I'm using something they call kermajuusto here in Finland. They will translate it as cream cheese, but of course it's not the one you might be used in some other places. This is a very creamy, very soft cheese. It melts quite nicely. I would recommend you use something like Gouda, for example, or whatever kind of cheese you prefer. You could even use some cheddar or something with stronger flavor. With the stuffing, you can play a bit. You can use ground beef, you can use refried beans, you can use a mix of all of those, maybe some cream cheese or whatever you prefer. I waited 10 minutes now and the jalapenos are ready, so I can start peeling them. First of all, peeling the jalapenos is optional. I know there's a lot of people who use them as they are because the skin doesn't get as chewy as with, for example, poblano. But personally, I think if you peel them, you will get a much softer texture, and it's just way more pleasant when you eat them. It's important to remember, if you are doing this with your hands, you need to wash them quite nicely after. Use a lot of soap, scrub them for a bit longer than usual, just to be safe. Some people prefer using some gloves for this. I think they just get on the way, so I don't love them. But if you want to use them, it's perfectly fine. Now that my jalapenos are peeled, I can use a knife. I'm going to make a small cut around halfway through the jalapeno, and then I'm going to cut this perpendicular cut. This way we can open them quite nicely, we can work on them, we can clean them, and then we can stuff them quite easily. Some people might prefer avoiding the first cut, but I think it makes the stuffing quite more complicated. I just like to make it this way because it's way easier. Once I made the cut, I'm going to use a small spoon. I try to remove all the seeds. I try to remove some of the veins. I don't really mind them because jalapenos are not that spicy. If you were using some other kind of pepper that's a bit more spicy, you might want to remove them completely and be very thorough. But in this case, it doesn't really matter that much. Once the jalapeno is clean, I'm going to add the cheese. In this case, I'm really glad this piece of cheese was a bit too big. So I'm going to show you because, as you can see, it doesn't quite close. So in this case, I'm going to cut it in half and put it back. It is not necessary for the jalapeno to close completely, but we want to close them as nicely as we can. Once we have closed our jalapeno, I'm going to set it aside. Don't worry if it opens a bit, but we're gonna set them aside and continue stuffing the rest of the jalapenos. Once my jalapenos are stuffed, I could start coating them, but I know this step is tricky, especially if it's the first times you have tried it. Now that I have stuffed my jalapenos, I could start coating them, but I know this step is a bit tricky the first times you try it, so I'm going to try a trick to try to fix that. I've seen a lot of people use this, so I want to try it myself. I'm going to throw my jalapenos into this glass container. I don't want them to touch too much, I don't want them sticking, but I'm going to set them on their side. That way they will not open. I want to get them to stay as closed as possible. I will then cover the jalapenos, throw them in the freezer for about 1 hour, and this way they will be a bit harder and it will be easier to handle them while coating them. It has been almost 1 hour since I put the jalapenos in the freezer, so now it's time to prepare the coating. For the coating, I'm going to use some egg, and I will start by splitting the whites from the yolks. How many eggs I am using depends on the size of the peppers, it depends on the size of the eggs, but for jalapenos I will usually use 1 egg for every 3 or 4 jalapenos. In this case I have 9 jalapenos and I am using 4 eggs. For splitting the egg whites and the yolks, I personally like using the eggshell. I think it's the easiest way, very simple, but if you have any other method, please use whatever you prefer. This process is quite simple, but I from time to time get some eggshells on the mix. I don't do this very often, so of course it needs practice, but if you happen to have this issue, then you can use the eggshell just to fish for the pieces of eggshell. It's very simple, way easier than trying to grab it with your hands because it will just run away from you. Once I have split the eggs, I'm going to add some salt on the egg whites and then I can continue. For coating the jalapenos, I'm using this egg foam, and for that we're going to start with the egg whites. I am using a hand mixer. I'm using about medium power. Very quickly I switch to full power. I just want a lot of foam, and that's the easiest way and the quickest way to do it. I've seen some people complaining about this process being a bit complicated, that it doesn't always work, but I think the issue is using the eggs straight from the fridge. Here in Europe we keep them on the counter. They don't go through some cleaning process that maybe in the US and sometimes in Mexico might make them have to keep them on the fridge. So in case you have them on the fridge, you should take them out a while before. Just let them on the counter for a while so they get to room temperature, and that will fix all the issue. It's going to be very simple to make them foam. As you can see, it's very quick. Very quickly now we have a nice foam. It's getting thicker and thicker every time. It's just a matter of a few minutes and these will be ready. You want to keep doing this until you can turn off the mixer, lift it, and you'll notice these small spikes. I don't know if you can see, this angle might not be the best, but you get a small spike and the spike just stays there. It will not fall and melt. That's exactly the texture we want. And at that point, I'm going to give it a couple more seconds, and then I'm going to take my egg yolks and throw them in there. Egg yolks have a lot of the flavor, and that's why we want to introduce them here. But if you would start with the egg yolks there, then you will not get the foam. For that reason, you need to start with the egg whites. Once we add the egg yolk, it's very simple and very easy to see if we have mixed them correctly. You will notice there's still white spots. We want to get rid of those completely. Just mix the egg yolks and you'll be ready. Now it's been 60 minutes and we can check on our jalapenos. I don't know if you can see, but they're not completely frozen. They're not that hard, but they keep the shape quite nicely when I grab them, and that will help us with the coating. Now that the jalapenos are ready, my foam is ready. I also have a bowl with some wheat flour, this all-purpose flour. You can use whatever you prefer. I have set up this kind of like coating station quite nicely here. And now, after adding the flour, that will remove some of the moisture, will make the foam to stick a bit nicer. I am going to dip the jalapeno in this foam. You might notice it's not the easiest. You get some holes. You might get a bit of this foam not sticking completely the first time, but after a bit you will get the hang of it. It gets easier the more you make it. Here I have a pan. It's on a 7 out of 9, so medium high fire. Make sure it doesn't start burning. If it gets too hot, you can lower and play with the heat. You can just lower it a bit or for a while, then bring it back up. For this, you can use a deep fryer. You could use a pot full of oil and just dip the whole jalapeno. In this case, I'm just using a pan with a bit of oil. The main reason is the jalapeno will puff quite nicely. You can just roll it around and cook in maybe 2 or 3 flips, depending on how big it puffs. But also, if you tilt the pan a bit, it will cook nicely. You probably just need to have it there for a while and then flip it. For flipping, in this case, I was using my hands, but of course the oil is quite hot. This is very common in Mexico to do. I think a lot of people who are comfortable in the kitchen might do it this way. But if you're not so comfortable or you're afraid the oil might jump or whatever, I recommend to use a pair of tongs or maybe even a couple of spoons or whatever you feel comfortable with. I want you to see how beautiful the color of this coating is and how much it has puffed. This is the beauty of it. That's the texture we want. It will be very airy, very puffy, and this will bring a lot of texture to the jalapeno. These jalapenos might have been frozen for a bit, but they're not deeply frozen. So having them on the pan just for a bit until the coating gets golden and it gets a nice color, it will be very quick and it will be enough for the jalapeno to unfreeze, get warm, and the cheese to melt. This whole process is quite quick. It will take maybe a couple minutes. We just want the coating to get a nice color, and as soon as it's golden, it's puffy, then it's probably ready. Once the jalapeno is ready, I'm going to take it to my plate back here where I have some kitchen paper. The egg, as you might know, can absorb quite some oil, so we want to lay them on this paper to maybe absorb a bit of that excess oil. If you have seen other videos I make, you might have also noticed I sometimes use a strainer, a metal strainer on a pot just for the oil to drip, and that's another option you can use. Right now I'm showing you how to make 1 jalapeno at a time, but of course you can throw a few here and do them quite quickly. Just do 3 or 4 at the same time. This is how I make these jalapenos, these stuffed jalapenos. It's a recipe I really like. I don't do it very often because, as you can see, it might take some time when you are like cutting the jalapenos and stuffing them. It's one of those recipes that has not that many steps, but they take some time. You have to wait for the jalapenos to freeze for a bit. But if you have time, it's definitely worth it. I like the recipe because you can play with it. You can use cheese as I did. You can use maybe some fresh cheese. You can use some refried beans, some meat. You can mix those, maybe some beans and cheese is also very nice. You can play with it. You can serve these with some sauce. You can serve it just like this as an entry, or maybe put them as a snack. You know, in the middle of the table, you can grab these on a tortilla, have like a taco kind of thing. You can put it on a bread, have a sandwich. It's one of those that you can serve in many ways also. So I really like it. I really like the texture. If you serve these with some sauce, it will absorb it quite nicely. If you like egg, this is definitely something you need to try. I also like this technique because you can apply it for other kind of peppers. You can use maybe some bell peppers. Poblanos are probably the best ones for this, but there's also these kind of yellow big ones that I've seen a lot in the Middle Eastern stores, and those go really nicely if you use some meat on them. Anyway, I hope you like them. Try it at home, press like, subscribe, activate the bell, all those kind of things, and see you in the next one.